We are at war, and you probably didn't even know about it. That's pure Stephen Harper, though. He does not communicate anything with Canadians. And what worse not to communicate than the fact that we are at war? Canadians deserve to know when and if we are going to war. And the way we're going about this is by conducting bombing missions against the state of ISIS in Syria. But bombing alone does not work. Bombing alone has never worked. What bombing does is it kills many innocents. And to date, in Syria, we've killed up to 500 civilians. Even worse, when you start bombing the enemy, they decide to hide where you won't bomb, or where we hope you wouldn't bomb. And that's in residential areas, near schools, and near hospitals, or deep down in the ground. So by bombing alone, we will never combat this enemy. Even worse, this is an American-led mission, not a NATO mission, as Mr. Mulcair explains.
Multilateralism has always been a Canadian approach. But don't forget, you've just named a few NATO allies, but this is not a NATO mission. This is an American-led mission. This is not a United Nations mission, unlike the mission I just referred to in Libya a couple of years ago. So we think that we are taking a wrong-headed approach here, and we know that a lot of the horrors that we are seeing are the direct result of the last misguided war, and I think that, frankly, Canada got it right when we said we would stay out of the 2003 war.
Exactly! Americans do not have the best track record when it comes to going to war. They went to war in Iraq in 2003, they went to Vietnam, and they were late to both world wars. Let's face it, Americans also do not have the best agenda when it comes to war. And now, Stephen Harper has committed our troops to this extended mission, which according to this credible article, which references the US intelligence, has no clear goal or end in sight. Now, Mr. Harper is content to lie to you that this is a NATO mission.
It's not true what Mr. Mulcair says. Not a few NATO allies. All of our NATO allies support this. And not only our NATO allies. Virtually all of the countries of the region, a Muslim region, support this.
No, Mr. Mulcair is right. It's you who's lying. This is an American-led mission, and this is not a NATO mission. Germany, a NATO ally, is providing aid, but is not contributing to the bombing missions or the firefights. They are only providing humanitarian aid. Now that lie was bad enough on its own, but then he says this.
Yes, the reason they support this is this organization has become the global nerve center of a violent jihadist movement that is not only threatening, literally slaughtering hundreds of thousands of people in Iraq and Syria before we intervened.
Literally slaughtering. Then if conditions are so bad, why are we not helping the refugees? To date, we've only accepted less than 2,000, and the plan is to accept 10,000 over the course of the next 4 years. If conditions are so brutal as Mr. Harper likes to showcase, then why are we waiting so long to help out some of these refugees? Not to mention another promise of action after the election. On the other hand, Germany, our NATO ally, is well on their way to accept 800,000 refugees. This is a world crisis, and we shouldn't be relying only on countries such as Germany. We need to help, and with only 2,000 refugees accepted thus far, we haven't done much. Worst, here's a refugee that we didn't help. I must caution you, this image is quite graphic. This is the image of a 3-year-old boy named Alan Kurdi who drowned while making the crossing from Turkey to Greece in hopes for a better future. He was fleeing with his mom, his dad, and his older brother, who was also quite young at 5 years of age. Both him, his mother, and his brother drowned. And the worst here is that they had relatives in Vancouver who were willing to sponsor them to come to Canada. But what happened? Our Canadian government rejected the application. Now, because of this tragic death, it seems the Conservatives have a newfound compassion for refugees. And now they want to increase their refugee intake to 20,000 over the next 4 years. But again, why wait so long? Why wait 4 years to help some of these refugees? I'll give you a real credible plan, Justin Trudeau's, and he says he wants to intake 25,000 refugees immediately. Not in 4 years, immediately. And Justin Trudeau has always standed by helping refugees. This is a stance that he's always held. And here is the proof of it. Justin Trudeau giving a speech to the House of Commons this April concerning our extension into the war against ISIS. Canada has an opportunity to help these victims of war and a moral obligation to do more than token assistance. To that end, we believe that the federal government should immediately expand to 25,000 the number of refugees that it commits to accept, and that it directly sponsor all of those refugees. In addition, here were the Liberal leader's words on how to tackle this problem, or this war, so to speak. Training, humanitarian aid, and resettlement help for refugees are the elements of a serious, smart, and sustained approach to the crisis in Iraq and Syria. We would also like to encourage the government to take a broader, less reactive approach to security challenges. We need to work on preventing threats before they materialize, rather than just reacting to them after the fact. And in all honesty, to anyone who still has doubts about Liberal leader Justin Trudeau, then I suggest you to read his speech, and that'll be a good place to start to misplace those doubts. Because Justin Trudeau is an incredible person, and he's one hell of a humanitarian. You can find the link to his speech in my YouTube description. The world needs to focus on helping those refugees. The Liberals will help the refugees. The NDP will help the refugees. Mr. Harper, however, has done everything but that. He has only admitted less than 2,000 refugees when there is an estimated 11 million Syrians fleeing their country. But Mr. Harper is on his way out. Mr. Harper is not going to be our next Prime Minister. And when that time comes, Canada will be back the example to the world when it comes to immigration, helping refugees, and being open and inclusive to new citizens. At a time where climate change, war, and poor living conditions will drive more refugees and more migrants, a world example is crucial. We will be that example, we can help, and we will show the way forward. It's safe to say that this war also has a lot to do with fighting terrorism at home. But again, war is not the answer. Think of the terrorist attacks that took place this January in France. The attacks lasted 3 days and killed 16. They were against a satirical magazine called Charlie Hebdo because of how they portrayed some parts of the Muslim faith. After the attacks, the entire nation was in shock. But then, the entire nation came together and showed us that this is how you fight ISIS.
I've lived in Paris for 40 years and have covered many of the most important international news stories of these past several decades. On several occasions today, tears came to my eyes as I saw the sights and heard the voices and songs of the largest rally in French history since the liberation of Paris. Today, France spoke with a unified, loud voice and said no to terrorism and yes to freedom of speech, liberty, and democracy. In the crowd of possibly 2 million faces, one could see people from all backgrounds, ethnic groups, religions, and walks of life. And together, at many occasions, they collectively shouted, Vive la France.
Vive la France, indeed. 6 million people throughout France came together on Sunday, January 11th, 2015, in a stand against terrorism, all united together. 2 million people alone in Paris. Hands together, they raised awareness that we are not scared of terrorism, that terrorism has no place in our heart, whether we are Muslim, Christian, it doesn't matter, we don't support it. We won't live in fear and we won't accept it. That was the message resonating from France. It was beautiful, and that's how you fight ISIS. By being open and inclusive, not racist or discriminative. Ironically, Canadians have never been too fond of war. When we have been called upon, we were there to fight the good fight, but we always preferred diplomatic solutions. To that end, we actually have the best track record for peacekeeping on Earth. If you take a look at this image, it's evident that we've been awesome when it comes to peacekeeping, until Mr. Harper showed up and put us 62 on the list. Clearly, his priorities do not match with those of Canada. So to you, my friends, to you, my viewers, let's stop this bombing campaign against ISIS. Let's fight a real war that will seek to end corruption, bad policies, and the centralization of power in our parliament. And that begins with putting Harper out of office where he belongs.